I always considered myself a reasonable neighbor. In the 6 years I had lived in Oakwood Heights, I had maintained my lawn according to HOA specifications, kept my holiday decorations tasteful, and attended the quarterly meetings with a smile, even when they dragged on for hours. My modest two-story colonial sat on a quiet street lined with similar homes, each trying to maintain that perfect balance between individuality and conformity that suburban living demands. I worked from home as a software consultant, which meant I noticed things about the neighborhood others might miss. The first signs were subtle. I was working late one evening when my computer suddenly reset. Not a full power outage, just a quick flicker as if someone had tugged at the electrical grid. I dismissed it as a random surge, but when it happened again the following night, and then twice more that weekend, I began to keep track. The incidents followed no particular pattern except they occurred most frequently in the evenings and on weekends. Soon, my smart appliances started behaving erratically. My Ring doorbell would go offline, my Nest thermostat would reset to default settings, and occasionally, my entire entertainment system would power down in the middle of a movie. When my electricity bill arrived that month, I noticed it was nearly 40% higher than usual. I called the power company, but they assured me there were no issues on their end. The representative suggested I might have a faulty appliance drawing excessive power. I followed their advice and checked every major appliance in my home, finding nothing unusual. The breaking point came one Tuesday evening when I went to retrieve a package that had been delivered to my back porch. As I walked along the side of my house, I noticed something odd about my outdoor outlet box. The weatherproof cover was slightly ajar, and upon closer inspection, I could see scratch marks around the edges, as if someone had forced it open. I immediately checked my security camera footage, the one camera I had installed after a series of package thefts in the neighborhood last year. What I saw made my blood boil. A middle-aged woman with a blonde bob haircut and designer athleisure wear, whom I recognized as Deborah Whitman from 3 houses down, was creeping onto my property under cover of darkness. She carried a heavy-duty extension cord, which she plugged into my outdoor outlet before running it along the edge of several properties back to her house. The footage showed her doing this multiple times over the previous 2 weeks, always after 8 p.m., always with the same furtive movements of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Deborah, or Karen, as many neighbors privately called her, was notorious in our neighborhood. She had moved in about 2 years ago and quickly secured a position on the HOA board. Since then, she had been the driving force behind increasingly restrictive community guidelines. She was the one who insisted on mandatory approval for any exterior paint colors, who campaigned against children's basketball hoops in driveways, and who personally measured the height of everyone's grass with a ruler. Now I discovered she was stealing my electricity to power what appeared to be her son's go-kart, which I had occasionally seen them using in their backyard. I spent the next week documenting everything. I installed 2 additional security cameras with better night vision capabilities, kept meticulous records of when my power fluctuated, and calculated the estimated cost of the electricity she had stolen. I even took photos of the extension cord's path when she left it connected overnight. I was determined to have ironclad evidence before confronting her. On Saturday morning, when I saw her sneaking over with her extension cord while I was supposedly away at the gym, I decided enough was enough. I had deliberately parked my car a block away and walked back home through the community greenbelt, anticipating she would take advantage of my apparent absence. As she was plugging in her cord, I stepped out from behind my garage. "Good morning, Deborah," I said calmly. "Is there a reason you're connecting an extension cord to my house?" She nearly jumped out of her skin, dropping the cord and spinning around to face me. For a moment, naked panic flashed across her face before she composed herself into an expression of indignant authority. "I was just checking to see if this outlet was the source of the interference with my son's radio equipment," she replied smoothly. "We have been experiencing some electromagnetic disturbance in our home, and as the HOA compliance officer, I have the right to inspect potential sources of community disruption." I kept my voice level, despite the absurdity of her claim. "That is interesting, because I have video footage of you connecting this same cord to my outlet on 14 separate occasions over the past 3 weeks, always when you thought I was not home. And curiously, the cord always leads back to your garage where your son operates his go-kart. Her face hardened. You have been recording me? That is a violation of privacy and against HOA regulations regarding surveillance equipment facing neighboring properties. I will be filing a formal complaint and recommending a fine at our next board meeting. I pulled out my phone and showed her the footage. The cameras are on my property, pointing at my property, which is perfectly legal. They just happen to capture people trespassing on my property and stealing my electricity, which is a criminal offense in this state. Deborah's demeanor changed instantly. She stepped toward me, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. Do you know who I am in this community? I am personal friends with the police chief and the mayor's wife. I have connections with every member of the HOA board. No one is going to take the word of a single man who works strange hours over mine. If you pursue this ridiculous accusation, I can make your life very difficult. There will be violations found on your property. There will be noise complaints filed. There might even be questions about your home business and whether it violates zoning regulations. I maintained my composure, though my heart was pounding. I am simply asking you to stop stealing my electricity and to compensate me for what you have already taken. I have calculated it to be approximately $170. She laughed, actually laughed in my face. Prove it. Prove that I have taken anything from you. Prove that I was not performing my duties as an HOA officer. See how far that gets you. She picked up her extension cord, coiled it over her arm, and walked away, calling over her shoulder. And remove those unauthorized cameras within 24 hours, or there will be consequences. I stood there, seething with anger and disbelief. I had expected denial, perhaps even embarrassment, but not this level of brazen entitlement and threats. That night, Deborah made good on her word. She returned with her extension cord while I was watching through my security app, this time deliberately positioning herself in full view of the camera, smirking as she connected to my power. She left the cord in place all night, powering not just the go-kart but what appeared to be a miniature refrigerator and some sort of power tool in her garage. The message was clear. She did not care that I knew, and she did not believe I could stop her. The next morning, I awoke to find a violation notice from the HOA taped to my front door, citing unauthorized surveillance equipment and unapproved exterior fixtures. The notice included a fine of $250 and a demand that the cameras be removed immediately. At the bottom was Deborah's signature with her title, Vice President, Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association. I knew then that this was not just about electricity. This was about power of a different kind. Deborah was accustomed to exerting control over her neighbors through intimidation and her position of authority. My challenge to that control had escalated the situation beyond a simple case of theft. She was now determined to establish her dominance and ensure I understood my place in her carefully ordered world. But she had misjudged me. I was not someone who would back down from a bully, even one with connections. I was going to fight back, but I needed to be strategic about it. My first step was to follow proper protocols, if only to demonstrate that I had tried to resolve the situation through appropriate channels. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA management company, detailing Deborah's theft of electricity with supporting evidence including video footage, photographs, and calculations of the stolen power. 2 weeks later, I received a form letter stating that my complaint had been reviewed and dismissed as a private dispute between neighbors that did not fall under HOA jurisdiction. When I called to follow up, the property manager, who I later learned was Deborah's cousin by marriage, informed me that my evidence had been deemed inconclusive and suggested I work things out with my neighbor directly. Next, I contacted the utility company to report the theft. The customer service representative was sympathetic, but explained that without evidence of actual meter tampering, there was little they could do. They suggested I file a police report, which I promptly did. The officer who took my report was professional but not particularly interested. He classified it as a low-priority civil matter and advised me to pursue it through small claims court. He did, however, provide me with a case number and promised to send an officer to speak with Deborah, which he apparently did 2 days later. This had no effect except to make her more careful about removing her extension cord before daylight. In the meantime, the HOA violations against me multiplied. I was cited for an oil stain on my driveway that I had never noticed, for shrubs that allegedly exceeded the permitted height by 2 inches, and for storing my garbage cans in a location visible from the street, though they were in the exact same spot they had been for 6 years. Each violation carried a fine, and each fine came with a smug personal note from Deborah about community standards. I consulted an attorney who specialized in property disputes. After reviewing my evidence, he confirmed that I had a strong case for theft of services, trespassing, and possibly harassment. However, he cautioned that legal proceedings would likely take months and cost thousands of dollars, with no guarantee of success given Deborah's connections in the community. He suggested a more practical approach: install a locked cover on my outdoor outlets and perhaps a perimeter alarm to deter trespassing. I followed his advice, purchasing heavy-duty weatherproof covers with padlocks for all my outdoor electrical outlets. The day after I installed them, I returned home to find them damaged beyond repair, with clear signs that someone had taken a hammer or similar tool to them. There was no proof it was Deborah, of course, but the message was unmistakable. The next day, I received another HOA violation notice, this time for unauthorized modification of home exterior, in reference to the outlet covers. What Deborah did not know, what nobody in the neighborhood knew, was that before moving to Oakwood Heights and transitioning to software consulting, I had worked for 15 years as an electrical engineer for a major utility company. My job had involved designing protection systems for the power grid, creating solutions to prevent and respond to unauthorized power draws and dangerous electrical conditions. These skills had not been relevant to my current life until now, but they were about to become very useful indeed. I spent several evenings researching the most current electrical protection devices and reviewing state laws regarding property protection. I was careful to ensure that my plan stayed within legal boundaries while effectively putting an end to Deborah's theft. I ordered specialized equipment, a high-sensitivity circuit monitor capable of detecting the specific pattern of Deborah's power usage, a custom relay switch, and a controlled circuit protection device that could deliver a powerful but carefully calibrated surge. While waiting for the components to arrive, I continued to document Deborah's increasingly brazen behavior. She now barely attempted to hide her power theft, sometimes connecting her cord in broad daylight and leaving it in place for entire weekends. She had also begun a whisper campaign against me in the neighborhood, suggesting to other residents that I was unstable and potentially dangerous. Several neighbors who had previously been friendly began to avoid me, crossing the street when they saw me coming or declining my waves of greeting. When my equipment finally arrived, I spent a full day designing and assembling my system. The concept was elegant in its simplicity. When the circuit detected the specific pattern of power draw that matched Deborah's go-kart, which had a distinctive electrical signature due to its motor, it would trigger a controlled power surge through that outlet only. The surge would be powerful enough to damage electronics connected to it, but not so powerful as to cause a fire hazard or harm a person. Crucially, it would only activate when detecting the specific power signature of the go-kart, meaning it would not affect normal devices or pose a risk to innocent users. I installed the system on a Friday afternoon, knowing from established patterns that Deborah typically stole the most power on weekends for her son's racing activities. I placed the control unit inside my garage, connecting it to the outdoor circuit that Deborah had been accessing. I then added several safety features to prevent any risk to my property or individuals, targeting only the irregular power draw that matched Deborah's theft pattern. Finally, I set up 2 additional hidden cameras, these ones much smaller and better concealed than my previous obvious cameras, to document what would happen when the system activated. To create the perfect opportunity, I made a show of loading weekend luggage into my car and drove away Friday evening, making sure to pass by Deborah's house as I left. Instead of leaving town, however, I checked into a hotel just 20 minutes away and monitored my security system remotely. For several hours, nothing happened. Then, at approximately 9:15 p.m., my phone alerted me to movement on my property. I watched in real time as Deborah approached my house with her extension cord, testing the outlet to verify it had power before connecting her cord and retreating to her garage. I monitored the power usage through my specialized app, watching as she turned on various devices in sequence. First came some garage lights, then a small appliance that was likely her mini fridge, and finally, at 10:22 p.m., the distinctive power signature of the go-kart being tested. The moment the go-kart's electrical system fully engaged, my protection system activated exactly as designed. On my security feed, I could see a brief flash from my outlet box as the surge traveled down the extension cord. Seconds later, Deborah's garage lights flickered, and then I heard a distant pop followed by the sound of her son's panicked shouts. Deborah came running out of her garage, frantically following the extension cord back to my outlet, where she disconnected it and examined the plug. Even on the night vision camera, I could see that the plug had partially melted, clear evidence of her theft that she could not hide or explain away. The look on her face was a mixture of shock, anger, and dawning comprehension. She knew exactly what had happened, and she knew that it was no accident. Someone had protected their property against her theft. I remained at the hotel that night, returning home the following morning with witnesses, 2 friends who had come to help me unload from my trip. As we pulled into my driveway, I saw Deborah and her husband loading the damaged go-kart into their SUV, presumably to seek repairs. When she noticed me, she quickly looked away, hustling her confused husband into the vehicle before I could approach them. For the next week, Deborah avoided me completely. When we happened to cross paths in the neighborhood, she would turn around or cross the street. She did not attend the scheduled HOA meeting, sending a brief email about a family emergency that required her attention. Most tellingly, there were no more extension cords, no more power thefts, and no more violation notices on my door. The incident sparked curiosity among my neighbors. Word spread quickly that something had happened between Deborah and me, though the details remained vague. Several neighbors, perhaps sensing a shift in the power dynamics, began to share their own stories of intimidation and unfair treatment at Deborah's hands. One elderly couple confided that they had been fined repeatedly for their bird feeders, which Deborah claimed attracted vermin. Another neighbor revealed that his children's treehouse had been ordered dismantled after Deborah measured its height and found it 6 inches over the permitted limit. Approximately 2 weeks after the incident, I received an unexpected visit from George Hernandez, the HOA president. He was a retired judge who had always seemed fair-minded but somewhat detached from the day-to-day operations of the association. He asked if he could speak with me privately, and I invited him into my home. "I will be direct with you," he said after declining my offer of coffee. "Deborah Whitman has resigned from the board, effective immediately, citing personal reasons. Before she left, she attempted to push through several punitive measures aimed specifically at your property, which I blocked. I have also reversed all fines assessed against you in the past month, as I found them to be without merit." I nodded but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "There have been rumors," he said carefully, "about certain activities Ms. Whitman may have been engaged in. I do not know the details, nor do I wish to. However, I want to assure you that the board is committed to fair and transparent governance moving forward. We will be reviewing many of the regulations that were implemented during Ms. Whitman's tenure." He paused, looking at me thoughtfully. "I understand you have a background in electrical engineering." "I do," I replied simply. He nodded slowly. "Fascinating field. I imagine it equips one with all sorts of specialized knowledge." He stood to leave, then added, "The board would welcome your participation in the future should you be interested. We could use someone with your technical expertise." After he left, I noticed a pattern of neighbors making small, friendly gestures toward me. Waves from across the street, invitations to block parties, offers to collect my mail when I traveled. It seemed that in standing up to Deborah, I had inadvertently broken some spell of fear that had held the neighborhood in its grip. Deborah's husband came to see me about a month later. He was a quiet man who worked long hours and was rarely seen at community events. He stood awkwardly on my front porch, declining my invitation to come inside. "I wanted to apologize," he said stiffly. "I was not aware of what Deborah was doing. When the go-kart's electrical system was damaged, she initially blamed it on a manufacturing defect. It was only when the repair shop showed me the evidence of a power surge that I began to ask questions. One of those questions was why our electricity bill dropped by 30% after the incident. I said nothing, just nodded in acknowledgement. "We will be moving at the end of the month," he continued. "I have accepted a position in another state. I wanted you to know that I understand why someone might have felt the need to protect their property." He extended his hand, which I shook briefly. "I am sorry for any inconvenience my family caused you." As he walked away, I felt an unexpected sense of compassion for him. He had been caught in Deborah's web as much as the rest of us, perhaps more so. I wondered if the move was truly for a job opportunity or if it was his way of starting fresh, away from the reputation his wife had created. The Whitman's house sold quickly, and the new owners, a young couple with twins, proved to be delightful neighbors who brought cookies to introduce themselves and asked politely about community guidelines rather than issuing demands. At the next quarterly HOA meeting, I was nominated to fill the vacant board position and elected unanimously. My first proposal was to create a more transparent process for addressing violations, including a requirement for photographic evidence and a system of appeals overseen by a rotating committee of residents. It has been 6 months since the incident with the go-kart. My electricity bill has returned to its normal level, and my security cameras have captured no unusual activities around my property. The neighborhood feels different now, more relaxed, more cooperative, as if everyone is breathing more freely. New residents moving in comment on how friendly and welcoming the community is, unaware of how recently that would not have been the case. I sometimes reflect on whether my solution was the right one. I had exhausted all proper channels before taking matters into my own hands. The legal system had failed me, the HOA had been corrupted, and Deborah had been escalating her violations of my property and privacy. What I did was carefully calculated to cause only appropriate consequences to the specific tools of theft, while breaking no laws and creating no danger to persons or property. It was not revenge so much as it was the restoration of balance. There is a satisfaction in knowing that sometimes, with patience and specialized knowledge, justice finds a way even when traditional methods fail. As I sit on my back porch on summer evenings, enjoying the gentle hum of my properly functioning electrical system powering my outdoor lights, I feel at peace with my community and my role within it. The power dynamics have shifted, not toward any individual but toward the collective good of all residents, and there is not an extension cord in sight.